All right, kia ora koutou, everyone. We won't hold things up too much. So I'll kick things off just with a karakia. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kia uta, kia mā taratara kia tai. E he ake ana te atakura, he tiho, he huka, he hauhu, ti he Moriora. Kia ora, everyone. My name's Paul Shaddock, and I'm the Community Engagement Manager with Nelson City Council. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight's webinar. We still have guests coming through, but we don't want to hold things up, so we'll keep cracking as it goes on. Firstly, thank you very much to attendees for coming along and giving up your time to be here and attend this webinar, but also thank you to council staff. And also I want to acknowledge Nelson Mayor Dr. Nick Smith, who is attending this meeting before he packs his bags to head off to the New York Marathon. So thank you, Mayor Nick, for making the time to do that. Just in terms of, we'll provide a bit of an overview now of this webinar. How we're going to run this tonight is we will do a quick brief presentation in terms of on Plan Change 29 and explain the timeline of where this has come from, and more importantly, how you can shape the outcome of the plan by doing this submission. After the main presentation, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions. And to do this, to ask questions, you'll see on your Zoom screen at the very bottom, there's a little Q&A tab. So if you click on that Q&A tab, you can then type in your questions and ask away there. Also on that Q&A tab, you can also, if there's a question that you like and you want to see answer, you can click on that and give it a thumbs up. And so what we'll do when it comes time to answer those questions, we'll answer the questions which have the most thumbs up to begin with as we're moving down the list. So really nice and simple, and it's a great way that if you do see something you like, you say, yep, that's a good question, and we'll give that one thumbs up. Hopefully we'll see how we go. Hopefully the webinar will run for about an hour, and hopefully we'll get through most of those questions by then. And if not, then there will be information on the screen during the presentation, which will give you an idea of how to ask questions after the webinar as well, if you do need to ask that. So I will just quickly hand over to Mayor Nick for a few words before we start the presentation.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to those that have come on to the webinar. I want to give it the context that the council has heard the message from the community that there hasn't been sufficient information on Plan Change 29. So after the large public meeting at the Trafalgar Hall, the council decided to hold 5 neighbourhood meetings, and then this webinar has been added for those people as just another conduit by which there can be engagement. I want to join with Paul and thank the planning staff for giving up their evening time again to do the engagement. And just want to give a bit of the overview of both the process and the challenge. The issue around how Nelson grows is really challenging. You know, there are people that have very strong views that we shouldn't be extending further onto the horticultural Waimea Plains. And the Tasman District Council was rightly pointing its finger at Nelson and saying we need to take a greater share of the region's growth. We've had strong views about whether we develop up in areas like of the Maitai. And in the previous consultation processes, there was a pretty clear message to the council and to our planning staff that we manage more of the growth by intensification. Even in listening to many of the concerns about Plan Change 29, I'm actually not getting the feeling as Mayor that people are uniformly opposed to it. It's just that they're really concerned about the detail. And that's why this submissions process is just so important. And I really just want to assure people on the webinar, as I have more broadly in the community, that there is no set agenda here, that the council and its staff are genuinely just trying to find the right answer to this, and that through that submissions process, and I really want to compliment Emily on the work that she's been doing, of which I've been getting a lot of very positive community feedback, is the council's good faith is reinforced by the fact that we're providing the services of Emily to support people to be able to put those good quality submissions into the panel. The last bit I want to say is that, look, I get that this thing's really complicated. And that's just the nature of the beast. That is that when you're dealing with really complex things, we've got about 28,000 land titles in Nelson. We've got all these issues of whether it be liquefaction risk, landslide risk. We've got the issues of what will the side boundaries be, what will be the daylight angles, what will be the minimum site coverage. Just by nature of the beast, it's really complicated. And that's why having as many sessions of which people can get a good idea of that detail, how it affects both their own property and their community is really important if we're going to get the submissions to then be able to make sure that we get these plan changes right. So big thanks for joining the webinar. I'm going to leave the bulk of the questions to Mandy, head of our planning and environment team. But if there's any questions about the sort of political process, very happy to answer those. Again, thank you.
Yeah, kia ora, Nick. Thank you for that. Okay, I will just share the screen and we'll get into the presentation. All right, team, I'll just get confirmation that we're up and running.
Yep, looks good.
Lovely.
Right, kia ora koutou. Mandy Bishop is my name, and yes, I'm the group manager for the environmental management team. And with me, I've got some environmental planners here to help answer your questions. But firstly, a brief look at the timeline, how we got here, how we've got to Plan Change 29 is quite a process, starting back in 2013. If you can just go to the next slide. Thanks, Paul. When we started to change our current plan, because it's over 20 years old, it needed a refresh, it needed to be brought up to date. So work started in 2013. In 2020, central government came out with a national policy statement on urban development, and that required all councils to provide 30 years of growth. So council, along with Tasman District Council, started working on a future development strategy. And that strategy included intensification in Nelson, particularly because, you know, Nelson hasn't got much room to spread out. So intensification was chosen as a method to provide the future growth, the 30 years worth of growth. So as part of that future development strategy, there was informal consultation on that in September and October of 21, and formal consultation in 2022 in March and April. So also around that time, planning staff were aware that central government was proposing to completely repeal the Resource Management Act and replace it with new legislation. So the work on the completely new plan paused, and Plan Change 29 was born. It was initiated in order to meet the 30-year growth requirements for housing, basically, in Nelson, and implement the future development strategy that was adopted by Council in August 22. So Plan Change 29 was based on the work already done in the new Nelson plan for housing. The intensification that was introduced in the future development strategy, which included higher multi-storey residential buildings up to the 6 stories. But Plan Change 29 also updated the previous work with the latest natural hazard information that we had. And intensification for Plan Change 29 was based around trying to get, or the more intense intensification, the higher density for residential living was based around a 400-metre walking distance from centres, or being accessible to other facilities and transport links. So that was the theory behind choosing the areas for providing the higher density residential development within Plan Change 29. So in January of 23, the Plan Change 29 stakeholder consultation happened, and now we're at the stage where we've got public consultation for Plan Change 29, which is open until the end of this month, open until 31st of August. So we've had some public meetings, as the Mayor mentioned. We've got Emily, who's very helpful and has been very busy helping people understand what's needed to make a good submission. We've also had planners answering emails and questions up on our SHAPE page, answering phone calls and meeting people face to face as well. We've also had library drop-in sessions, which have been very well attended. So people have, so planners have been available at libraries to answer people's particular questions. So this part is really important. We have got a Plan Change 29 out there that addresses the RMA requirements and addresses the growth for 30 years, but we need your help to fine-tune it and make it a community plan where we're all happy with. So this is the time for you to make a submission, tell us what you like about the plan change, tell us what you may not like, give us your reasons, and importantly, tell us what you think would be a good alternative to what we've suggested as a method of providing for that growth. So once the submissions close, staff will be busy analysing those submissions and summarising them, and we expect a summary of submissions to be released probably end of January, more like February next year. And anyone who's made a submission by the end of this month can then make a further submission to support or oppose other people's submissions. After that period has concluded, then officers will analyse their submissions and the further submissions. We will have workshops with councillors to discuss the main points raised and consider whether we need further information or consider what needs to change in what we've proposed. So from there, the reporting officer will draft a report for the hearings panel, and that officer report will recommend potential changes to the plan. That report will be available to anyone who's made a submission, and everybody that has made a submission and wants to be heard can be heard in that hearing, where there'll be a panel of 3 commissioners who will not only read all the submissions, but also hear everyone who wanting to speak to their submission. We expect the hearings to happen around about August next year. Yep, but we just have to, we're not sure just exactly yet. It just depends on how many submissions we get and yeah, and how the timeframes work. So at the hearings, if you've made a submission and you want to speak to it, you can provide further information there that supports what you've said in your submission. So you'll have plenty of time after the close of submissions, end of October, till the hearing to prepare for that. So after the hearings have concluded, the commissioners will consider everything, all the information that's put before them, and then they'll report to council on their findings or recommendations. So then council decides to either accept or reject those recommendations from the hearings panel. And anyone that's been a part of that process can appeal whatever decision council makes. So that's the process. So it's been a long journey and there's still a fair bit of time left to go. As I mentioned, as part of that process is the future development strategy, and this just gives an indication of what was part of that. So as I said, the future development strategy introduced some higher intensification areas shown in the purple there, which enabled indicated up to 6 stories. The burgundy was 4 to 6 stories and the pink up to 3 stories. Plan change 29 kind of replicated that, although it's different colours. But plan change 29 also refined those areas where intensification would happen due to the more updated natural hazard information. So in plan 29, the bright yellow, if you just go back for a bit, Paul, the bright yellow zone is the general residential zone. The lighter orange is the medium density and the brighter orange is the high density. Thanks. Next one. So as I say, all that natural hazard information was built into identifying what areas are sensible for intensification and what areas weren't. So some of the key differences in the plan change 29 zoning for the new residential zones. The general residential zone is pretty similar to our residential zone at the moment, up to 2 stories, except that the plan change 29 zone enables up to 3 residential houses to be on one site, if you want it. The medium density residential zone, again, enables up to 3 houses on the site and up to 12 metres or 3 stories. The high density residential zone, again, up to 3 residential houses on one site, but increases the height up to 6 stories or about 19.5 metres. Now, those standards are an example of what is permitted by the proposed planning rules. There are a number of other rules that apply, such as daylight angles, setbacks from boundaries, maximum building coverage, etc. on the sites. So all that needs to be checked out to understand, the whole package of changes that's happening or proposed to happen under Plan Change 29. But the general message here is what's proposed. Do you think that's a good idea? The permitted standards are, if developments can't meet the permitted standards, that means they need a resource consent. And there's also various stages within the resource consent, and it identifies various factors that need to be assessed as part of that resource consent. So if you understand what the permitted standards are, what triggers are needed for a resource consent, have we got that right? Do you think there should be more triggers for resource consent? Do you think we are assessing the right things if a resource consent is required? All those sorts of things to think about as you look through the proposed Plan Change 29 standards. So on that note, I'll hand over to Coralie, who will talk you through how to check out what those standards are. Thanks, Coralie.
Hi, folks. To check the details in the plan change, you go to our Plan Change Shape Nelson page or the Council's main website, and in the Shape Nelson page, you would click on the green button that says View the Plan Change, ePlan, up at the top of the screen. So the first thing that comes up is the map, and it starts off in a very zoomed out picture where you can see all of Nelson, and you have the option to search for an address or to move the map around and zoom in and out to the properties. The map is first thing you see, and it's very important because the rules in the plan are grouped by the zone. So to know which rules to look at and which chapter of the plan you need to read, you need to know what zone you might be building in. So you would either click on your property if you've found it by manually zooming there, or you would search your address, and the information panel that you can see on the left-hand side of the page here is the property information that is relevant. So it shows you the existing zones and the proposed zoning and whatever overlays may be relevant for your site. In this instance, we're looking at Civic House on Trafalgar Street, and it's in the inner city zone, the inner city centre, and it is in a high flood overlay and a liquefaction hazard overlay. Now that we know the zone, we can go to the plan itself, and you can do this in a bunch of different ways. I've got some stars up on the left-hand side of the screen showing you the links that you can click on to get to the plan itself. So next slide, please, Paul. Once you get to the plan itself, you would make sure that you have Plan Change 29, the housing plan change, selected. You can see the blue dashed line box in the top left-hand side of the page. So that gives you the option to choose which plan change you want to look at, or whether you want to go back to the original NRMP. Once you have the plan change selected, then you would use the drop-down menus on the left-hand side of the page to go into the different zone chapters and find the zone that you're in. So in this case, again, the inner city zone, and you would look at the rules within that chapter. So I'm showing you the rules here that are, this is the rule table, the rule index, if you'd like. All of the blue rule numbers are links that will take you to the rule itself. And you can see the existing rules that are not proposed to be changed. They're showing as white background. The rules that are being proposed to be deleted have a blue dashed line box around them, and they are greyed out, so they're quite difficult to read because they're being deleted as part of the proposal. And the rules that are surrounded by a blue dashed line and they have the grey background, but you can actually read them, those are the proposed rules. Those are the new ones that we're bringing in. So the words that are defined have a blue link, and that will pop up a little box that gives you the definition of that word, which is very helpful. You don't get those pop-up boxes in a hard copy. And the numbers are links as well, so that you can go straight to the specific rules you're interested in. So it's got way more functionality than the hard copy version ever did. You can also download the plan if you wanted to read it in PDF form. You can bookmark particular pages to come back to them later, and you can read the plan change in a show plan change mode, which shows you green underlined words for the new rules that we've added, and it strikes through and turns red the rules that are proposed to be deleted. So it's quite easy to see the changes that we've made in the plan change mode if you want to look at the specific details of each individual change. That's really quite useful when you're looking at the proposed changes to the objectives and policies, for example. You can see the objective as it was and what is proposed in the new wording. I will hand over to Emily now, but I will also mention that if you do download the plan, you probably don't want to print it out because it is 893 pages long. So that's almost a full package of paper. So I recommend using ePlan. Over to you, Emily.
Thanks, Coralie. Kia ora, everyone. I can see from the attendees list quite a few names that are new to me, so I'm perhaps meeting some of you for the first time. And my name's Emily Bayliss. I'm the friend of submitters who's assisting in a great number of residents finalising their submissions, and I've enjoyed the sessions so far and the opportunity to help submitters to really sharpen their thoughts and distill them into some useful material for council. And I've just included a few suggestions here to sort of reframe the conversation as you are contending with your submissions. Some of you may be partway through this process, but others of you may be thinking that the next week or so is the time to get started. So my suggestion principally is to be as clear and succinct as possible. It's not necessarily about the length of your submission, but really getting to the salient points and including with your submission an ask of council. What is it that you would like to see council do with your submission? What are you asking for in terms of modifications to zones, modifications to rules? You can support your request with a brief explanation of your reasons why, but certainly it needs to be supported by that idea of your initial ask. Another suggestion is to consider what you would accept in terms of the application of zoning or rules in your area. There may not be anything that you can think of, but there will be some of you that may say, well, this zone or this zone with these tweaks would be acceptable to me. And that's just, again, a suggestion to get your thinking cap on. Something really important that I'm hearing from submitters is that conflict. If there are areas that you are supportive of and others that you are not, that there might be provisions within the inner city that you're very supportive of, and it's completely fine and appropriate to support those provisions while at the same time having concern or wishing to oppose other elements of the plan change. It's fine to include maps, diagrams, photographs if you wish, and particularly if they help to illustrate your point, but it's not essential to do that. And my last point and suggestion is to speak to me. I've got a very full dance card tomorrow, Thursday, but I'm available via Zoom, as well as some drop-in sessions next week, Wednesday and Thursday. I've also included there a link to the Ministry for the Environment's guidelines for the making of submissions, and that can just provide a little bit of additional support as well. Very happy to unpack anything I've raised here, either in this session or by booking a time with me using my details below. Thank you.
All right, kia ora. Well, thank you very much, everyone. So now we're actually at the time where we can actually answer, you can ask and we'll try and answer your questions. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. And I see we've got, so I've got a question here is, to begin with, could you please show a map of areas highlighting the different residential zones? Right, so we might have to jump back to my screen share. Just bear with me for a moment. Okay. No, we haven't got that on the screen yet, have we? There we go. The joys of technology.
Oh, what have you done? You did have it.
I did have it, and then it just disappeared to me. There we go. Yep. Okay, so we're just going to jump back to. Okay, so there we go. So that's the one with the different residential zones. So as Mandy said earlier, is that bright yellow there is the general residential zone. We have the sort of the pale orange there, which is the medium density residential zone, and the darker orange is the high density residential zone. And there's also obviously zones for the city centre and the inner city fringe area as well. Okay, Coralie, do you want to add anything to that?
I can share my screen with the mapping if people want to see different parts of Nelson. This particular screen only shows us the central city.
Yep, if you've got that up, that would be wonderful to share.
Yes, here we go. So there's quite a lot of yellow residential zone. If I bring the legend up, the bright yellow is the residential, and it covers a very large portion of Nelson. If we zoom down into Stoke, you can see that surrounding the shopping part of Stoke and the parks, which are shown in white for the purposes of this map, we've got some high density surrounding Stoke, and then some medium density residential surrounding the high density residential, and then the yellow of the plain general residential zone beyond that. If we move up, we've got Tahunanui showing here. The pink is all of the industrial zone land that we currently have in Tahuna. And then the pale yellow that you can see here is the Tahunanui area that is not proposed to be upzoned. If we move up to Edify, you can see that's largely general residential zone with some medium density residential surrounding the shops in Edify. And then once we get past Marybank, we are into just the standard residential zone that is in the operative Nelson Resource Management Plan at the moment.
Yeah, excellent. And then just to add to that, I see someone else has popped up in terms of the just to explain with each one of those zones the height rules again, just the stories which are allocated to each zone. If you could please do that.
In the high density residential zone, there is a maximum building height of 19.5 metres. In the medium density residential zone, which is this lighter orange colour here, you have a maximum building height of 11 metres with an additional 1 metre for some types of roofs. So that's about 3 stories of housing permitted in the medium density zone. And then in the standard residential zone, you have a maximum building height of 8 metres, which is, sorry, that was the general residential zone. You have a maximum building height of 8 metres or roughly 2 stories. 19.5 metres gives you roughly 6 stories of residential buildings. And in the Nelson inner city area, and the inner city fringe, you have a maximum building height of 24 metres, which is about 6 commercial stories. The commercial buildings are taller than the residential buildings. So that's why you've got 6 stories for 24 metres and 6 stories also for 19.5 metres. That's the difference between the interior stud height of a commercial building versus a residential building.
Cool. Wonderful. Thank you, Coralie. Appreciate that. All right, so we've got another question here from Bob. It says, can you share the reasoning for allowing for high density development in areas that are in a hazard zone, earthquake fault or liquefaction overlay area?
So the areas that are proposed to be intensified but do have natural hazards, we do have a significant amount of new rules that go with each of the natural hazard overlays, and those natural hazard overlays are designed to manage the risk of development within those areas. Where the risk is deemed to be very high, for example, in the moving landslip in the Tahunanui slump zone, the risk there is so high that we're not proposing intensification in that area because it's not able to be managed in an appropriate way. And where the wood and Te Hunanui are very low lying, we have deferred intensification in those areas until we have done some work to decide how we as a community adapt to climate change. So in those areas, we haven't allowed for the intensification of the new zones, but everywhere else, the natural hazard overlays do manage the risk from those natural hazards. But we definitely want feedback on whether or not we have appropriately managed those risks in a way that is acceptable for people. Have we got those thresholds for development in those areas right? Is that something that needs to change? Please make a submission and let us know how we're doing with those natural hazards overlays.
Cheers, Coralie. So another question which leads on from that is, so can you comment on the reasoning behind the placing of the high density zone in Te Huna, which is in a steep residential area with small streets rather than the neighbouring flat, easily accessible commercial area?
Yeah, definitely. We have enabled intensification within the flat commercial area. That is showing up in the map as a purple. It is suburban commercial zone. So suburban commercial allows for residential development above the ground floor up to 24 metres in building height. So that suburban commercial purple area does allow for a significant amount of residential intensification should the property owners choose to intensify in that area. The orange on the hill is an area that wasn't covered in our mapping as a particular slope instability area. And so it got the high density zoning. We have had some feedback through submissions already that maybe that's not quite right in that area. So that is something that we will be able to look at and reconsider through the hearings process. But this area is very close to the suburban commercial zone and the schools and the public transport line. So that's why it was initially put forward as a intensification area, and through the submission process we can look at whether or not that is the most appropriate location for that high density in Te Hunanui.
Cool. Kia ora, Coralie, that's great. Okay, so we have another question here. It's relating to the commissioners. So was it not a conflict of interest for two of the future commissioners for Plan Change 29 to take part in the vote on the 14th September, whether to pause the process on Plan Change 29 as it is?
I think that's probably one for me, Paul.
It does indeed. Go for it.
Yeah, so I don't think it is a conflict of interest. And firstly, it was myself that recommended that the panel be made up of a planning expert and then two councillors. The two councillors are those that are experienced and have got the resource management qualifications, Rohan O'Neill-Stevens, the Deputy Mayor, and Trudy Brand. Now, there was a resolution at the council meeting. I think it's probably time I turn my lights on, Paul. We've just lost the sun. I'm sorry.
That's right. In the dark there.
As soon as I answer this question, I'm going to go turn some lights on. But the motion that was put by Mel Courtney was that the plan change be withdrawn and that we then do some further neighbourhood consultation and then re-notify the plan after that additional step. I think it's being a bit tough on those two councillors to say, well, you can't participate in that. You've got some big vested interest because you're a hearings panellist. I genuinely don't think that's correct. And the other part is that some people have said that they would prefer all of the hearings panel to be out-of-town experts. It's my genuine experience, and I spent 7 years as the Minister for the Environment, is that locally elected representatives with the resource management training are actually more likely and better able to understand the local community and to respond to submissions than necessarily expert commissioners. So look, I understand people are nervous about the process. I have got total confidence, and I voted differently on the resolution at that council meeting from both Rohan and from Trudy. But I have absolute confidence in them keeping an open mind and them doing a good job on the panel. The last bit I'd say is this, Paul, just be really open about the fact that this issue is a bit of a balance and a tension. You've got people of my generation who own property, and I bought my first house in the 1980s. And the truth is that for a younger generation, that it is really tough, and their home ownership rates are a lot less than what our generation was, our older people, sort of the 50 plus generation. And this issue does bring into tension between those people who own homes that would just prefer their neighbourhood stay the same, and a younger generation that want to know there's sufficient housing supply and affordable houses for them. And that is why I quite deliberately recommended to the council, Rohan, who was actually the highest polling councillor, voted in, but also represents, in my view, well, that younger generation. And I don't think Trudy will take offence in me saying that she's more of my age group and represents an older generation, because this issue does involve an intergenerational balance of equity, making sure we are fair to neighbourhoods so that we do keep those things that are special about Nelson, but also make sure that Nelson's a place for a future for our younger generation.
Good, Nick, thank you. Okay, so next question we've got is, from what I'm hearing, Plan Change 29 will not affect the wood at all. Could you confirm? I'll pass over Coralie on that one.
Thanks, Paul. First of all, I do need to issue a small apology. I did say just before that the maximum building height for the suburban commercial area in Te Hunanui would be 24 metres, but I was incorrect. It is 12 metres proposed for Te Hunanui rather than 24. So talking about the wood, I will share my screen again because I have brought up all of the natural hazard overlays that are relevant for the wood. So the wood doesn't benefit from the intensification enabled by the new residential zones. The wood retains its existing residential zones, which does enable some development to occur at a reasonable level of intensity, so it can be developed. We have seen development in the wood on Weka Street and on Tasman Street that responds quite well to its surrounding environments. But what the plan change does propose for the wood is revised natural hazard overlays. So there are changes to whether or not you will need resource consent when you look to build in the wood. If you're within one of these colourful overlays on the wood here, you will need to take that natural hazard into consideration when you are building, and it is quite likely that you would need a resource consent, more likely than it is under the current set of rules. We also have some proposals that are affecting all of the zones, all of the residential zones. So that includes changes to the transport provisions, requiring accessible car parking where you are providing accessible units. And if you are creating new commercial buildings, you would be needing to provide areas to park bikes securely. There are also some changes in the wood that would mean that people living closest to the state highway would need to acoustically insulate any new habitable spaces so that new bedrooms close to the highway don't have to put up with the highway noise. So that's part of the proposal that would affect the wood as well. So the wood doesn't get the medium density or the high density, but there are changes that do affect the wood. So even if you live in the wood, it is still a good idea to have a look at the plan change and tell us whether or not we've got those new rules right. especially in relation to the natural hazards, because those are the ones that are most likely to affect you if you go to build in the future.
All right, kia ora. Thank you, Coralie. Okay, so I think we're actually the last call for questions. So if there's anyone else, speak now or forever hold your peace. No. All right. Well, if that's looks like we've come to the end of the questions, and so thank you very much, everyone. So actually, what we'll do is, if there's no other questions, we'll wrap this up now. So please remember, there are obviously that you can get in contact with the planners if you have any questions. And please, we implore you, I think submit is the most important thing that you can do. So as Emily said earlier, there's options that you can get in contact with her if you have questions or how to do a good submission. But we really encourage you to submit and let us know if we've got it right or what we can improve or what alternatives are. So we'd really encourage you to do that. Okay, so what we'll do is I'll close it off with the karakia. Kia whakarea te tapu, kia wātea ai te ara, kia taruki whakataha ai, kia taruki whakataha ai. Humie, huie, taiki. So restrictions are moved aside, so the pathways are clear to return to everyday activities. Kia ora, everyone, and thank you for spending your evening with us, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much. Ka kite.
Thank
Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.